My name is David Rains. I'm 38 years old. 12 years ago, I was Captain Rains, commanding over 130 men in Afghanistan, trusted with life or death decisions every day. People used to salute when I entered a room. I had the uniform, the medals, the respect, and a sense of purpose so clear it could cut through steel. Back then, I believed I'd earned my happy ending. But happy endings don't come easy in real life. I came back to a country that barely remembered me, to a marriage that had slowly rotted from the inside. My wife, Lauren, had waited, but something in her had changed. Or maybe it was me. After years of war, I wasn't the same man she'd married. I was quieter, quicker to anger, and always felt like I was still in combat, even while sitting at the dinner table. One morning I woke up and half the house was gone. The photos, her clothes, even the coffee machine I liked. She took those and left the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. I thought it was just anger, a temporary break. But it wasn't. Within months she took everything else our son included. His name's Eli. He was 7 when she left. I remember standing outside the courthouse still wearing my old dress blues, hoping the judge would see what I'd sacrificed. All I got was a signature and a restraining order that said I couldn't see him for 90 days. 90 days turned into years. The money didn't last long. Legal fees, therapy, and back child support. I sold my truck. Then my watch. Then the house. The medals I'd kept in a shadow box ended up in a pawn shop 2 towns over. No one wants a hero with no income. So I became what every failed man eventually becomes: practical. I signed up to drive for Uber. Seemed fitting. I'd spent years driving convoys through hostile territory. Now I was shuttling drunk college kids to their dorms. The first few rides were hard. Every thank you for your service hit like a brick because they didn't know what came after the service. They didn't know I was sleeping in a 1-bedroom rental above a bait shop, that I heated soup with a hot plate and showered at the gym. I smiled, gave them bottled water, and tried not to cry when they played the music too loud. Some nights I'd park near the lake just to think. I'd sit there watching the water ripple, wondering how the hell I got here. One night I saw a man walking his son, maybe 8 or 9 years old. The kid laughed and tugged at his dad's hand, and I felt something crack in my chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. The kind that doesn't make noise but follows you like a shadow. I never thought I'd fall this far. I'd spent years believing that service guaranteed security, that if I gave everything I'd get something back. But the world doesn't work like that. There are no parades when the uniform comes off. Just silence, paperwork, and bills. Some days I feel invisible. Still, I keep driving. It's not glory, but it keeps the lights on. And maybe it's not the end. Maybe this is just the part. No one talks about the part where the hero loses everything. Because something tells me this story isn't over yet. Not even close. It had been 9 months since I last saw Duke. My ex-wife took him when she moved out, said Eli needed him more than I did. I didn't argue. At that point I was too numb to fight over a dog. But not a day passed that I didn't wonder where he was, or if he still remembered me. That morning I was waiting for a pickup outside a strip mall in Buckner. I was drinking cold gas station coffee when I noticed something moving near my car. At first I thought it was just a stray, until I saw the familiar scar on his left ear and the way his tail twitched when he spotted me. It was Duke. Dirtier, skinnier, but still Duke. He trotted up like nothing had changed and sat right at my feet, tail wagging slowly, eyes locked on mine. I froze. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or dreaming or both. I dropped the coffee and knelt, running my hands through his coat. He smelled like pine needles and old garages. That's when I saw it. A small pouch tied to his collar, sealed with weathered twine. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper. The handwriting was neat, block style, like it came from someone who spent years filling out forms in triplicate. It wasn't from Lauren. It wasn't from Eli. It wasn't even from Duke's vet. It was from someone named Denise Holloway. I didn't recognize the name, but something about it made my chest tighten. The letter was short, direct. She said she knew my father, said there were things I needed to know, said Duke had come home for a reason. I must have read it 5 times in the driver's seat before starting the engine. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if this was a prank or something worse. My father had died years ago, at least that's what I'd always been told. He was military too, killed in a classified OP. I was 13. Mum never talked much about it after that. But the way Denise wrote it didn't sound like he was just a memory. It sounded like he was waiting, like there was something he'd left behind, something important. And Duke the damn dog had somehow been part of the plan. I glanced over at him in the passenger seat. He was already asleep, snoring softly like nothing about today was strange. I, on the other hand, was trying to catch my breath. A part of me wanted to crumple the letter and forget the whole thing. But another part, a deeper part, was suddenly wide awake. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. Maybe closer than I'd been in years. Denise lived just outside of Wichita Falls, in a modest house surrounded by wind chimes and desert roses. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe someone younger, colder. But she looked like someone's favorite aunt, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed. When she opened the door and saw Duke, her hand went to her heart like she'd been holding her breath for months. We sat at her kitchen table, old wood, scratched from years of stories and coffee cups. She didn't waste time. She said my father's name before I did. Mason Rains. She said it like she knew him better than I ever had. She told me he wasn't dead. Not really. After his last deployment, my father had gone underground. He'd faked his death during a black ops extraction. The government let it happen. Too many enemies, too much danger for the family he left behind. They said it was the only way to keep us safe. Denise had been his partner back then. Not romantically, but in mission after mission where one wrong step meant body bags. When he disappeared, she was one of the only people who knew the truth. He didn't abandon me. That's what she kept saying, over and over. He never stopped watching, never stopped protecting. He just couldn't be seen. She showed me photos of him in the distance at my high school graduation, a blurry image from a crowd at my army commissioning ceremony. I'd always felt someone was watching that day. Now I knew who it was. Denise handed me a thick envelope. The seal had been broken. Inside was a letter handwritten in the same blocky script I remembered from old birthday cards. My father wrote that he'd been investing quietly for over 2 decades. Real estate, tech stocks, oil royalties. The kind of money that didn't scream luxury but grew in silence. The total was staggering. Nearly $900 million in holdings, trusts, and charitable funds. All of it was mine. But it wasn't the number that got me. It was the line at the bottom. He wrote, "If you're reading this, it means you've hit bottom." Good. Solid ground is the best place to build something that lasts. I read that line 3 times, each time feeling something in my chest loosen. He knew me. Even after years apart, he knew what I'd lost. And somehow he'd known I'd survive. The letter ended with the name of a woman to call Francine Oakley and a bank vault code. Denise said everything was ready. My father had spent his last years putting this in place, knowing one day I'd need a reason to believe again. She looked at me, then straight through the fog in my eyes, and said he never stopped loving you, David. He just had to do it from the shadows. And in that moment, every space I'd carried since I was 13 felt a little less heavy. After Denise gave me the letter, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Not the man from my childhood, but the ghost that had followed me for years. Only now I realized he hadn't been a ghost. He'd been real. And he'd been there. The memories started small. Little things. I remembered getting jumped behind the middle school gym in 7th grade. 3 older kids shoved me against the wall and ripped my backpack open. They laughed while I bled from my nose. That night, one of them went home with a broken arm. The school never found out who did it. Back then, I thought it was a miracle. Now I wondered if it had been him. Senior year, I'd saved every dollar from working at a hardware store to pay for the ROTC application. I was still short. The fee was $200. I came home one day and there was an envelope taped to the fridge. No note. No handwriting. Just the cash inside. Mom said it must have been a neighbor. I didn't question it. I was too excited. But deep down, I knew better. There was the car that started running again after a month of stalling. The tire that got patched while I was in class. The laptop I thought I won in a scholarship raffle. The man who stood in the shadows near the fence at boot camp graduation. I'd caught his eye for a second, then he turned and disappeared. I spent years thinking I imagined it, but I hadn't. Every favor. Every moment when the world should have let me fall and didn't. It was him. My father. The man I thought was dead. He'd been behind me like a second shadow stepping in when no one else could. And I never knew. It crushed me. Not just because he was gone now for real, but because I'd spent so much time angry at him. I'd hated the empty chair at my wedding. I'd cursed him under my breath the day Ely was born, wishing he were there to teach me how to hold my son. I'd blamed him for every failure I carried. And all that time he was watching, protecting me from the edge without asking for thanks. I remembered one night after my first deployment. I was at a diner outside of El Paso, shaken and hungry, still smelling like desert sand. A man in a denim jacket paid for my meal and left without saying a word. I didn't get a good look at him. Just a grey beard and a familiar limp. That same limp I used to see in old home videos. And the birthday card. My 25th. It came without a return address, signed only with a single sentence. You are not a goldfish. I didn't understand it back then. I was drunk and alone and tossed it in the trash. Denise explained it later. My dad used to say that all the time. Goldfish forget everything after a few seconds. He told her I wasn't a goldfish, that I would remember the pain, the lessons, and carry them with strength. I started seeing him everywhere, in old news clippings, in the bank statements he must have arranged, in emails that came from untraceable sources giving me advice I didn't think I needed. It wasn't surveillance. It was guidance. Gentle, invisible, and always timed when I was about to break. And now, knowing all this, the guilt came in waves. I wanted to scream at the world for keeping us apart. I wanted to call him and say thank you. I wanted one more day. But all I had was the silence he left behind and the legacy he built while hiding in plain sight. I sat with Duke that night on the porch, the wind cutting through the trees like whispers. I whispered back. I told him I knew now, that I forgave him, that I finally understood. He hadn't run from us. He'd run for us. To protect, to provide, to prepare something bigger than a folded flag and a 21-gun salute. My whole life I thought strength was loud. Guns, orders, medals, shouts. Turns out the strongest thing a man can do is love without being seen. My father was the quietest warrior I'd ever known. And I only just started hearing his footsteps behind me. Once the bank confirmed everything, it didn't feel real at first. I walked out of there with access to more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. But instead of buying cars or moving into some high-rise downtown, I drove back to the same apartment, sat at my old table, and stared at the wall for an hour. Then I made a decision. If my father spent his life building this in secret, I wasn't going to waste it in the spotlight. The next morning I started calling around. I reached out to shelters that served veterans places I had once lined up for coffee and clean socks. I asked what they needed, not what I could donate. They said dignity. They said jobs. They said someone to believe they were still worth something. So I built that into the mission. I called the foundation's second fire. It was my way of saying the flame doesn't die after discharge. It can burn brighter. We offered job training, housing support, therapy, and legal aid. No red tape. No speeches. Just boots on the ground and hearts in the right place. Within 6 months, we were helping hundreds. Within a year, thousands. I watched men I used to serve with walk in broken and leave with purpose. I hugged women who had lost everything after coming home and gave them keys to their first apartment in years. Every face reminded me of who I used to be and how close I'd come to being lost for good. This wasn't charity. It was redemption in motion. People started talking. Reporters called. City officials showed up with plaques. I didn't care about any of that. What mattered was watching someone smile again after years of silence. What mattered was seeing my father's name etched into the cornerstone of every life we helped rebuild. And yeah, I fixed up my life too. Got a decent house outside of town. Nothing fancy. Just clean floors, good light, and a backyard for Duke. I stopped driving Uber. I started sleeping again. I started feeling human again. But the biggest shift wasn't the money. It was the mindset. I no longer woke up dreading the day. I woke up thinking of who I could help next. That fire inside me, once dimmed by divorce failure and shame, was blazing again. And it wasn't from war. It was from kindness, from action, from finding meaning not in command but in compassion. For the first time since the army, I felt proud again. Not for what I survived, but for what I was building. And every brick I laid, every hand I shook felt like a conversation with my father. Like he'd passed me the torch and I was finally strong enough to carry it. Getting custody back wasn't just a legal process. It was a war of patience, proof, and persistence. I had to show the court that I wasn't the man I used to be, that I wasn't broken anymore, that I could be trusted with the one person I'd loved more than anything in this world. I walked into that courtroom with files in hand. Clean record, new income, a house, testimonials from counselors and colleagues. But none of that calmed my hands when I saw Lauren across the room. She looked surprised, like she wasn't sure how I had made it this far. Truth is, I didn't know either. The judge read my file for a long time. Then she asked me one question. Why now? I stood up and said, because he's still my son and I never stopped being his father. The courtroom went quiet. I didn't cry. But I looked her straight in the eyes and said I was ready to earn back what I lost. 2 weeks later, I got the letter. Full custody. Shared transition. Final review in 6 months. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter in one hand, Duke curled at my feet. I didn't cheer. I just exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath since the day they left. That night, I wrote a letter to Eli. Not because I needed to, because I had to. He was only 9, still too young to understand everything. But someday, he would read it, and when he did, I wanted him to know who I really was. I told him I had fallen more than once. There were days I didn't think I'd ever stand up again, that I made mistakes, big ones, but never stopped loving him. I told him about my father, about how strength isn't always loud and real love doesn't always show its face. I told him that the greatest gift I ever got wasn't money or medals. It was a second chance to be his dad. I ended the letter with a promise that I would be there no matter what. At his games, his bad days, his birthdays. I told him he never had to look over his shoulder because from now on I'd be right there. Not in the shadows, in the sunlight, where he could see me. I folded the letter and placed it in a small box next to my father's. One for me, one for him. The legacy wasn't the money. It was the love that never quit. The kind was passed down from father to son. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. Looking back, I don't recognize the man I used to be. Not the soldier in uniform. Not the broken father in the back of a rideshare car. Both of them lived inside me, but neither knew what it meant to lose everything and still get up anyway. I thought strength came from rank, from medals, deployments, and combat. But real strength came later when no one was clapping and no one was watching. It came in silence and doubt in those slow mornings when I had to convince myself to keep going. My father showed me that, not through presence but through sacrifice. He gave up the right to be seen so I could grow up safe. He missed birthdays, graduations, and weddings so that I could one day stand where he never got to. And still, even in hiding, he built something greater than I ever could have on my own. There are things I wish I could say to him, things I waited too long to understand. But maybe that's the point. Maybe love at its truest doesn't always give us closure. It just keeps giving, quietly, without asking for anything back. I used to be ashamed of where I ended up. Now I see it as the foundation. The crash wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I had to break to become the man I am now. Not a soldier. Not a victim. Just a father who's still learning, still trying, still here. Every day I watch my son laugh and grow. And every day I try to be the kind of man I once needed. That's all any of us can really do. Do not fix the past, but carry its lessons forward like a compass. My father gave me that compass. I'm giving it to my son. So if you're listening to this and you've lost something or someone or even yourself, I hope you hear this clearly. You are not done. The story isn't finished. And sometimes the chapter that breaks you becomes the one that saves you. Maybe your father wasn't perfect. Maybe you're not either. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real, or that it can't still mean something. The question is, what will you do with it now?